Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Idusuyi, and today we'll be presenting about Aduhelm, the history, efficacy, and clinical use. I'll be presenting alongside Karisse Lora, Roshica Dehaney, and Teonia Jerrett. So I'll be discussing a little bit about the history of the drug. Until recently, available treatments were only able to address symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as cholinesterase inhibitors. In October 2019, Biogen and Eisai announced plans to pursue regulatory approval for aducanumab after an earlier decision to discontinue the global phase 3 trials Engage and Emerge. July 8, 2020, Biogen announced the completion of the biologics license application submission to the FDA for aducanumab as treatment for Alzheimer's disease. November 6, 2020, the FDA's Peripheral and Central Nervous Systems Drug Advisory Committee voted against recommending this drug. On June 7, 2021, the FDA approved the first disease-modifying therapy for Alzheimer's disease under an accelerated approval pathway. As part of the accelerated approval, Biogen would conduct a controlled trial to verify the clinical benefit of Aduhelm in patients with Alzheimer's disease. The drug was listed for $56,000 annually, but is now listed for $28,000 as of December 2021. In July 2021, the Aduhelm label was updated, stating that the drug should only be used in patients with mild cognitive impairment due to the Alzheimer's disease or mild Alzheimer's dementia. July 13, 2021, the FDA pushed for pricing reforms, and Aduhelm was used as a primary example. So the drug's approval was considered controversial because the clinical trials gave conflicting results on its effectiveness. Specific criticisms of the approval included insufficient evidence of efficacy, and the drug offered a false hope, and the high cost was adversely impacted by patients' finances and Medicare budget. 10 of the 11 outside experts that had served on the FDA's Peripheral and CNS Advisory Committee voted in November 2020 against approving aducanumab. Soon after the approval, it was announced in early June 2021 that 3 of the panelists who had voted against aducanumab's approval had resigned in protest. On July 9, 2021, the FDA's acting commissioner, Janet Woodcock, requested that the Office of Inspector General, U.S. Department of Health Human Services, conduct an independent review of the interactions between the FDA officials and Biogen's representatives prior to the FDA's June 27th approval of aducanumab. The patient advocacy groups had lobbied heavily for the approval of the drug because of its novel status for a debilitating condition with very few therapy choices. Advocacy groups such as Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's Society of Canada, and the Alzheimer's Foundation of America were also in favor of the decision. Now I'll be passing it off to Karisse, who will talk about Aduhelm's clinical use.
So the drug was recently approved by the FDA of June 7th of 2021 under the accelerated approval based on its reduction in amyloid beta plaques, which will be discussed later in slides. It's used for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease in patients with mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia stage of disease. Continued approval for this indication may be contingent upon verification of clinical benefit in confirmatory trials. The limitations of use between starting the drug at earlier or later stages of Alzheimer's has not yet been studied. So a general review. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia, which is a general term for memory loss or other cognitive abilities serious enough to interfere with your daily life. Plaques are abnormal clusters of protein fragments that build up between nerve cells. Plaques form when protein pieces called beta amyloid clump together, and the beta amyloid comes from a larger protein found in the fatty membrane surrounding nerve cells. The plaques tend to spread through the cortex in a predictable pattern as Alzheimer's progresses. Aduhelm works as a monoclonal antibody directed against aggregated soluble and insoluble forms of amyloid beta. It reduces amyloid beta plaques, which is, as we discussed, is a defining pathophysiological feature of Alzheimer's disease. So now into dosing. Dosing is based on actual body weight. So 1 milligram per kilogram once every 4 weeks for infusions 1 and 2, 3 milligrams per kilogram once every 4 weeks for infusions 3 and 4, 6 milligrams per kilogram once every 4 weeks for infusions 5 and 6, and 10 milligrams per kilogram once every 4 weeks, starting with infusion 7, which is going to be your maintenance dose. The infusion should be administered at least 21 days apart, and there are no dose adjustments for hepatic or renal impairment as of yet. The patient-specific dose needs to be calculated in order to determine the number of vials needed. The drug is then diluted with normal saline, about 100 milliliters for infusion. Prior to infusion, diluted solution should be allowed to warm to room temperature if it's refrigerated. Moving on to adverse reactions, there can be amyloid-related imaging abnormalities known as ARIA, which can be seen as temporary swelling in areas of the brain that usually resolves over time. You can also see hemosiderosis, microhemorrhage, brain edema, and altered mental status, as well as diarrhea. So in order to monitor the efficacy of the drug, the patient must have a brain MRI done. This is going to be done 3 times, once prior to the initiation of the drug, another time prior to the 7th infusion, and then again prior to the 12th infusion. Now I'm going to be passing it on to Teonia, who's going to be discussing the efficacy of Aduhelm.
Well, the efficacy of the drug is still being studied, but there was a single ascending dose study, including the participant with Alzheimer's, that was completed recently. The objective of the study was to evaluate the tolerability and safety of Aduhelm, and the dose administered as a single IV to patients with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. The single dose was up to 30 milligrams per kilogram, and it was well tolerated with the linear PK. It was noted that the increase in the dose upwards towards 60 milligrams per kilogram did not alter its clearance. No unexpected safety concern associated with the Aduhelm in patients with milder to moderate Alzheimer's disease were observed in this trial. Aduhelm's efficacy as a treatment for the cognitive dysfunction in Alzheimer's disease cannot be proven by clinical trials with divergent outcomes. ENGAGE and EMERGE, which are both phase 3 trials from Biogen, observed efficacy. Out of both studies, one had favorable results while the other did not, which cannot be used to support an efficacy claim. Biogen has asserted that the total duration of exposure to high-dose Aduhelm was likely to be a critical difference between the 2 trials and account for this divergent outcomes. The drug is still being monitored in 100 patients today. Therefore, there's no final efficacy data in regards to Aduhelm. It is the only drug that works against the underlying cause of Alzheimer's disease, as we said earlier, it targets the B-amyloid plaques and lowers the protein tau, which tend to accumulate and compromise nerve function in Alzheimer's disease. Now I'll pass it on to Roshica, which she'll go into the clinical outcomes of the drug.
So now we'll be talking about the measured clinical outcomes. The ENGAGE trial that Biogen currently has underway measures its primary outcome as CDR-SC score at 72 weeks. CDR stands for Clinical Dementia Rating. This integrates assessments from 3 main domains of cognition: memory, orientation, judgment, problem solving, and 3 domains of function: community affairs, home/hobbies, and personal care. The raters assign a score describing participants' current performance levels in each domain. For example, ratings are assigned on a 0 to 5-point scale, 0 meaning absent, 0.5 meaning questionable, 1 is present but mild, 2 moderate, 3 severe, 4 profound, and then 5 would be terminal. This is seen as subjective information. Secondary outcomes include change from baseline in MMSE, or Mini Mental State Examination, at week 78, change from baseline in Alzheimer's Disease Assessment Scale Cognitive Subscale, or ADAS-Cog13 score at week 78, and change from baseline in Alzheimer's Disease Cooperative Study Activities of Daily Living Inventory at 78 weeks. Lastly, thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us.